Hey, episode 2 of Neal Stephenson Salute. Last one had a long intro, so I didn't get to say one of the reasons why I'm choosing to salute Neal Stephenson right now is that he has his new book coming out in softback this month. So I thought in the lead up I would just give a digital auditory salute to this titan, in my opinion, titan of writing, who's had a storied career. Last episode we talked about Snow Crash, phenomenal, still a 10 out of 10. His next book was another 10 out of 10. It's called The Diamond Age. He's still in the realm of sci-fi, or sort of typical sort of future sci-fi. He runs a bit further into the future. And this time, instead of sort of virtual reality and programming and hacking and things like that, the main theme of this one is nanotechnology. And just like in Snow Crash, where he took the notion of virtual reality spaces and ran it to the absolute nth degree and come up with a really readable, enjoyable romp in that world, he does the same with this one. The Diamond Age, so called because with the advent of nanotechnology, it's cheap. I'm trying to come up with a dramatic way of explaining it. It's cheap as chips to make things out of diamond. Like it's more expensive to make things out of traditional glass. You might as well let the nanobots create diamonds. So what would that do to the economy? What would that do to the world if there was suddenly parts of the world that had nailed this technology and parts of the world that hadn't? What would the tension be between those? It's phenomenal stuff. It's just a delight to read. And I think what I love so much about this book is the kind of moral foundation, or the unabashed moral foundation that runs through it. Even though it's about a far-flung technology, one of the main themes of it is about the clash of civilizations, and how that plays out throughout time, not just in some future imagining, but it's a tale for all time. This is how civilizational clashes always go down. There's some kind of disparity between the technological or philosophical efficacy of civilizations or communities that butt up against each other, and that causes tension in human affairs, inevitably. I think that's as vague as I can keep it, without just giving away the plot, which is delightful. The short version is, you got to read it. It's stunning. And in the same way that Snow Crash has been cribbed by tech bros, this one has been cribbed as well. There's the main plot line, without giving away too much, is that a sort of amazingly sophisticated nanotechnological book falls into the hands of a young a young girl from poverty, and because of her encountering this book, she goes on this journey of upward social mobility and an amazing adventure through this world that he's created. And that's been cribbed as well. I don't know. It was a story a while ago where some sort of tech experimenters, this is on a more innocent time, they're like, oh, screw it, what happens if we throw in some tablets, some iPads into an African village where they've never encountered technology? What would happen? And the results were kind of astonishing, astonishingly optimistic on the tech front, in terms of what the children ended up doing with the tablets. All of which makes me feel now that we're 15 years down the track of kind of internet ubiquity across the West, is that it was probably fake. I can't believe the results were that good. Now that we've seen what social media and tech does to children, does to humans, I actually think it was probably fake. But still, this is from an optimistic time of technology, but it's also hard-nosed about it. And so it's not saying that it's all peaches and cream or all diamonds and chain samurai swords. it comes with problems. It comes with serious problems to navigate, and those problems have been with us since the dawn of time, since the dawn of humans. Humans, as I said before, some humans gaining some kind of technological or logistical advantage over other humans, and the conflict that then results. Brilliant stuff. Well, I thought I would read a section of this, and it's just a section that describes, well, I'll read you the title: Security Measures Adopted by Atlantis Shanghai. So in a world of nanotechnology, in a world of massive inequality as a result of it, what defensive measures would be adopted, and what would the implications of those be? The defensive measures by a technological community to keep at bay the lumpen, non-technological proletariat. Let's find out. And again, got a little tickle in my throat. Might need to take a swallow break. A weird term. I don't know why I said that. Atlantis Shanghai occupied the loftiest 90% of New Chusan's land area, and in a plateau about a mile above sea level, where the air was cooler and cleaner. Parts of it were marked off with a lovely wrought iron fence, but the real border was defended by something called the dog pod grid, a swarm of quasi-independent aerostats. Aerostat meant anything that hung in the air. This was an easy trick to pull off nowadays. Nanotech materials were stronger, computers were infinitesimal, power supplies were much more potent. It was almost difficult not to build things that were lighter than air. Really simple things like packaging materials, the constituents of litter basically, tended to float around as if they weighed nothing, and aircraft pilots, cruising along 10 kilometers above sea level, had become accustomed to the sight of empty, discarded grocery bags zooming past their windshields and getting sucked into their engines. As seen from low Earth orbit, the upper atmosphere now looked dandruffy. Protocol insisted that everything be made heavier than need be so that it would fall, and capable of being degraded by ultraviolet light. But some people violated protocol. Given that it was so easy to make things that would float in the air, it was not much of a stretch to add an air turbine. This was nothing more than a small propeller, or series of them, mounted in a tubular foramen, wrought through the body of the aerostat, drawing in air at one end and forcing it out the other to generate thrust. A device built with several thrusters pointed along different axes could remain in one position or indeed navigate through space. Each aerostat in the dogpod grid was a mirror-surfaced aerodynamic teardrop, just wide enough at its widest part, to have contained a ping-pong ball. These pods were programmed to hang in space in a hexagonal grid pattern, about 10 centimeters apart near the ground, close enough to stop a dog, but not a cat, hence dog pods, and spaced wider as they got higher. In this fashion, a hemispherical dome was limbed around the sacrosanct space of the New Atlantis clave. When the wind gusted, the pods all swung in it like weather vanes, and the grid deformed for a bit as the pods were shoved around. But all of them eventually worked their way back into place, swimming upstream like minnows propelling the air turbines. The bines made a thin hissing noise, like a razor blade cutting air, that, when multiplied by the number of pods within earshot, engendered a not altogether cheerful ambiance. Enough wrestling with the wind, and a pod's battery would run down. Then it would swim over and nuzzle its neighbor. The two would mate in midair like dragonflies, and the weaker would take power from the stronger. The system included larger aerostats called nurse drones that would cruise around, dumping large amounts of power into randomly selected pods all over the grid, which would then distribute it to their neighbors. If a pod thought it was having mechanical trouble, it would send out a message, and a fresh pod would fly out from the Royal Security installation beneath Source Victoria and relieve it so that it could fly home to be decompiled. As numerous 8-year-old boys had discovered, you could not climb the dog pod grid because the pods didn't have enough thrust to support your weight. Your foot would just mash the first pod into the ground. It would try to work its way loose, but if it was stuck in mud or its turbines fouled, another pod would have to come out and replace it. For the same reason, You could pluck any pod from its place and carry it away. When Hackworth, so main character, when Hackworth had performed this stunt as a youth, he had discovered that the farther it got from its appointed place, the hotter it became, all the while politely informing him in clipped military diction that he had best release it or fall victim to vaguely adumbrated consequences. But nowadays you could just steal one or two whenever you felt like it, and a new one would come out and replace it. Once they figured out they were no longer part of the grid, the pods would self-scramble and become instant souvenirs. This user-friendly approach did not imply that grid tampering went ignored, or that such activities were approved of. You could walk through the grid whenever you chose by shoving a few pods out of the way, unless royal security had told the pods to electrocute you or blast you into chum. If so, they would politely warn you before doing it. Even when they were in a more passive mode though, the aerostats were watching and listening, so that nothing got through the dog pod grid without becoming an instant media celebrity, with hundreds of uniformed fans down in Royal Joint Forces Command. Unless it was microscopic. Microscopic invaders were more of a threat nowadays. Just to name one example, there was Red Death, aka the 7-minute special. Missed a page. A tiny aerodynamic capsule that burst open after impact and released 1,000 or so corpuscle-sized bodies, known colloquially as cookie cutters, into the victim's bloodstream. It took about 7 minutes for all of the blood in a typical person's body to recirculate. So after this interval, the cookie cutters would be randomly distributed throughout the victim's organs and limbs. A cookie cutter was shaped like an aspirin tablet, except that the top and bottom were domed more to withstand ambient pressure. For like most other nanotechnological devices, a cookie cutter was filled with vacuum. Inside were 2 centrifuges, rotating on the same axis but in opposite directions, preventing the unit from acting like a gyroscope. The device could be triggered in various ways. The most primitive were simple 7-minute time bombs. Detonation dissolved the bonds holding the centrifuges together so that each of 1,000 or so ballisticules suddenly flew outwards. The enclosing shell shattered easily, and each ballisticule kicked up a shockwave, doing surprisingly little damage at first, tracing narrow linear disturbances and occasionally taking chip out of a bone. But soon they slowed to near the speed of sound, where shockwave piled up on top of shockwave to produce a sonic boom. Then all of the damage happened at once. Depending on the initial speed of the centrifuge, this could happen at varying distances from the detonation point. Most everything inside the radius was undamaged, but everything near it was pulped, hence cookie cutter. The victim made a loud noise like the crack of a whip as a few fragments exited his or her flesh and dropped through the sound barrier in air. Startled witnesses would turn just in time to see the victim flushing bright pink. Blood-red crescents would suddenly appear all over their body. These marked the geometric intersection of detonation surfaces with skin and were a boon to forensic types, who could thereby identify the type of cookie cutter by comparing the marks against a handy pocket reference card. The victim was just a big leaky sack of undifferentiated gore at this point, and of course never survived. Such inventions had spawned concern that people from File A might surreptitiously introduce a few million lethal devices into the bodies of members of File B. That's P-H-Y-L-E, like a civilizational group. Providing the technically sweet possible twist on the trite, ancient dream of being able to instantly turn a whole society into gravy. A few inroads of that kind had been made. A few massed, closed casket funerals had been held, but not many. It was hard to control these devices. If a person ate or drank one, it might end up in their body, but it might just go into the food chain and get recycled into the body of someone you liked. But the big problem was the host's immune system, which caused enough of a histological fuss to tip off the intended victims. What worked well in the body could work elsewhere, which is why files had their own immune systems now. The impregnable shield paradigm didn't work at the nano level. One needed to hack the mean-free path. A well-defended clave was surrounded by an aerial buffer zone infested with immunocules, microscopic aerostats designed to seek and destroy invaders. In the case of Atlantis Shanghai, This zone was never shallower than 20 kilometers. The innermost ring was a green belt lying on both sides of the dog pod grid, and the outer ring was called the leased territories. Leased as in rented, L-E-A-S-E-D, leased territories. It was always foggy in the leased territories because all the immunicules in the air served as nuclei for the condensation of water vapor. If you stared carefully into the fog and focused up on a point inches in front of your nose, you could see it sparkling like so many microscopic searchlights as the immunicules swept space with LiDAR beams. LiDAR was like radar, except that it used smaller wavelengths that happened to be visible to the human eye. The sparkling of tiny lights was the evidence of microscopic dreadnoughts hunting each other implacably through the fog like U-boats and destroyers in the black water of the North Atlantic. Okay, great stuff. I'm not sure if I read that well enough or gave it enough context, but I find such writing amazing to consider. Just consider the possibility that in the future this kind of nanotechnology is on the way, and in the immediate term, drones and drone technology is already here. So what are the implications for that for society? What kind of interactions will there be between groups in the future who need to defend their airspace technologically, either with swarms of drones, which has to be imminent, doesn't it? That's surely on the way when 3D printer technology is able to just print out millions and millions of drones. Surely the time will come when drone swarms interact in the sky, and then beyond that, will this sort of timeline of humanity last long enough that we reach the level of producing nanotechnology? Overall, the way the society is described in the book, I would say that would be a good thing. In spite of the massive levels of inequality and social problems, I think that if it rolled out anything like this book, I think it would be a good thing. But there are desperate problems described in this book as well. Desperate pitfalls of society at that point. So anyway, again, the message of this is, I hope you enjoyed it. Don't be put off if you don't think I read it well, because the overall message is read The Diamond Age. It's a 10 out of 10. It's another one of Neal Stephenson's absolute masterpieces. All right, see you on the next one. Cheerio. Well, I struggled to find the stop button. Cheerio again. I found it.